There's a jar on my desk that I've never once put coins in. It's a wide-mouthed mason jar, the kind that gets sold in farm supply stores. And it holds pens and a letter opener and a USB drive I've been meaning to format for 3 years, and it has no special claim on that desk except the one I gave it, which is that it was the jar my father used the December I was 7 years old, when he carried it into the Westfield Valley Mall with both hands, walked up to the register at a toy store called Bright Star Toys, and counted out $7.33 in coins to buy me a stuffed rabbit I'd wanted since October. I still have the rabbit. Her name is still Biscuit, because I named her at 7 and the name has seniority over everything that has happened since. Biscuit still has her original embroidered nose, which is more than can be said for some things that have lasted 26 years. She lives on a shelf in my office, above and slightly to the left of the jar, which places her above and slightly to the left of the chair where I sit every day as the founder and principal of Carver Development Group, looking at the jar and the rabbit and the pens and thinking about a man in dark church trousers who once carried that jar across a city in both hands and was not embarrassed by it for a single moment. The Westfield Valley Mall doesn't exist anymore. What exists on that site now is the Westfield Valley Commons, a public library and a clinic and community space, and 72 units of affordable housing, and the development was recognized last year by the City Housing Authority and several organizations whose names you can look up. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, my father stood beside me, and I did not say anything publicly about the jar or about December of 1998. The ceremony was not about that. My father is not a man who needs his vindication aired at a podium, neither am I, but I've been thinking about it every day since. And this is the story I want to tell, not the ribbon-cutting part, but the December part, because the December part is where the whole thing actually started. Let me tell you about my father. His name is Rafael Mendoza, and he raised me alone after my mother left when I was 4, in a part of the city that the Westfield Valley Mall had been built to serve and had spent 20 years ignoring. He worked 2 jobs, a day shift at the printing house on Borden Street, a night shift 3 times a week doing deliveries, and he made it work in the specific way that people who are very organized and love somebody very much make things work that do not, by the math, quite work. He kept a budget in a spiral notebook, expenses tracked in his small, careful handwriting, the kind of handwriting that belongs to a person who learned to write in a different language and was meticulous about every letter. He did not buy things we didn't need. He did not complain about things he couldn't change. He made rice and beans in the big pot on Sundays that lasted us until Thursday, and on Fridays we made something different, and the difference was the treat. He is, the kind of parent who makes being poor feel like a logistics problem rather than a moral failure, and I did not understand until much later how rare that framing is, how much it costs a person to hold it, and what it gave me. It gave me the understanding that a problem with a number on it is solvable, that math is not fate, that the gap between what you have and what you need is a gap you measure and then cross, one decision at a time. Let me tell you a small concrete thing, because the abstract version doesn't carry enough weight. When I was 10, my father's car needed a repair that cost $412, which was $412 we did not have in any liquid sense. He opened the budget notebook to a fresh page and he listed the categories of our spending for the next 8 weeks, and he identified where there was any give at all, and he moved the give, category by category, into a column labeled CAR. He showed me the math, he walked me through every line. It took about an hour. This is how you solve a problem like this, he told me. You find what's movable, and you move it. The car got fixed on the 8th week. Not fast, not easy, not without cost, but solved. The week the car got fixed, he made pancakes from a box for dinner, and we ate them at the kitchen table, and he said, "Math, problem, resolved." I was 10. That's the whole education. He also made rice and beans in the big pot on Sundays that lasted us until Thursday, with as much attention to craft as any chef who's ever been reviewed, because if the rice was excellent, then every meal was excellent, and excellent meals are a form of dignity that costs almost nothing. He taught me this without calling it a lesson. In October, I wanted a stuffed rabbit. I had wanted it since September, when I'd seen it in the window of Bright Star Toys at the mall, white with brown spots, flopped ears, and embroidered nose that someone had taken care over. The price tag through the glass said $7.33 plus tax, which was a number I recognized as a number you could reach if you saved for it, because at 7 years old I had already been watching my father turn small amounts of money into solutions to problems, and I understood the basic arithmetic of accumulation. My father asked me the rabbit's name in September, when I pointed at the window. Biscuit. He started the coin jar in October. My father started the jar in October. He had a coffee can he used for change, the kind all dads have on the dresser, and one evening he got out the mason jar, which had previously held dried beans and still smelled faintly of them, and he moved the coins from the can to the jar and set it on the kitchen table and said, "This is the biscuit jar." He'd asked me the rabbit's name in September. My father takes everything I take seriously. Every time I've got coins, they go in here. You want to put coins in too, you can. He went and he put coins in it through October and November. Not a lot at a time. The change from the vending machine, the few cents back when he paid cash, the quarter he found in a parking lot one night on the way to his delivery shift. By the end of November, the jar was maybe halfway full, and I counted it with him one Sunday afternoon. There was $5 and something. We needed $7.33 plus tax. Christmas was 3 weeks away. He found the rest of it somewhere, by Christmas. I don't know where, and I learned early not to ask, because asking was the kind of thing that showed my father I'd noticed what he was doing to keep our life functioning, and noticing made him feel seen in a way that he couldn't quite allow without it costing him something, the way proud men are. Maybe an extra delivery shift, maybe something sold, maybe the jar just had enough. From the accumulated careful change of 2 months of putting in what he had. Compound interest, measured in love. On December 23rd, he took the jar and me to the mall. He was in his good clothes, the dark trousers he wore to church, a clean button-up, and I was wearing the red coat, and he carried the jar in both hands because the lid was a little loose and he didn't want to lose any of it. We took the bus. We walked from the bus stop to the mall entrance, my hand in his free hand and the jar in the other, and I remember the mall being very loud with Christmas music and very bright, and my father navigating it with the ease of someone who'd worked in a printing house for 12 years and understood how to move through a large space efficiently. Bright Star Toys was on the second floor. We went up the escalator, me holding the rail and him holding the jar, and he found the rabbit on the shelf exactly where it had been since September, which is the thing about beloved objects in toy stores. They wait for you, and he took it to the register. The cashier was a teenager, and she was fine. She called the price and my father set the jar on the counter and said he'd be paying in coins, and he opened it and started counting. He was methodical about it. Quarters first, then dimes, then nickels, then pennies, laying them out in rows on the counter in the way his budget notebook handwriting told you he would do it. Organized, exact, no wasted motion. The manager appeared while my father was still counting. I don't know what caught his attention. Maybe the coins, maybe the sound of them, maybe just the visual of a man in church clothes counting change at a register 3 days before Christmas. He came from the back and stood a few feet to the side of the cashier, and he looked at the coins on the counter and at my father, and he said, loud enough for the line behind us to hear, "Sir, we really prefer cash or card. Is there something we can do to help you find a different payment method?" My father looked up from the coins. He said, "This is cash." The manager did a thing that I have been describing the same way for 26 years, which is that he laughed, not a laugh you could put in a complaint. The kind that happens mostly in the shoulders and the eyes, the kind designed to draw in the people nearby, to invite the room to find the situation funny, to make the person at the center feel the accumulated weight of everyone who agrees with the laugher. "Right," he said, "but it's a lot of coins. Maybe we can figure out something easier for you." He gestured at the jar, at the coins, at my father, at the whole of it. My father put both hands flat on the counter. He looked at the manager. He said, in the exact same voice he used for everything, the voice that didn't change based on the audience, "I have the correct amount. I'm going to finish counting. Then I'm going to pay for the rabbit. Then we're going to leave." He went back to counting. I want you to understand what this cost him, which is something I only understood when I was older. The manager's laugh had been designed to make my father feel small enough to leave. My father understood this perfectly and chose not to comply with it, which sounds simple, and is in fact the hardest kind of simple there is, the kind that requires a person to be very sure of who they are. He was sure. He had always been sure. The coins were correct and the amount was right and the rabbit was going to come home with us, and no amount of shoulder laughing was going to change that, and the only response available to him that preserved every piece of what mattered was to finish counting. He finished counting. He laid the last few pennies out in their row. He looked at the cashier and said, "That's the correct amount." Not to the manager, to the cashier who counted it, and rang it through, and put biscuit in a bag with tissue paper, and handed it across the counter. The people in the line behind us were very quiet. On the escalator down, my father held my hand and I held the bag with biscuit in it. I remember the texture of the escalator rail and the Christmas music still going in the mall and my father's hand around mine, which is the hand of someone who works with it, and it shows. After a moment I said, "Papa, why did he laugh?" My father thought about it for a few seconds, which is what he always did, considering the question seriously before he answered. Then he said, "Because he thought the coins were embarrassing. Some people think it's embarrassing not to have a lot of money. Those people are wrong." I waited. "Money is what you use to get things done," he said. "It doesn't matter what shape it comes in. What matters is whether you have the right amount, and we had the right amount." He squeezed my hand. "You understand?" I said yes. I was 7 years old and I understood it the way 7-year-olds understand things, which is not fully but indelibly. The way certain things land in you when you're young and wait there, taking up no space, until you're old enough to know what they were. We rode the bus home with biscuit in the bag and the empty jar rattling between my father's feet on the floor of the bus, and he paid the fare with a transit card and not coins, which I noticed. And when we got home he put biscuit under the tree skirt, the red one with gold trim that had been my mother's, and we out to Dingens, had dinner, and he did not say anything more about the manager. He was not the kind of man who needed to. The thing was done and the rabbit was under the tree, and the math had been solved, and that was the whole of it. I did not say anything more about it either. But I kept the thing that had landed in me on the escalator, the solidifying thing, the click of something into place. I kept it for 20 years. I've been spending it ever since. If you've never watched someone you love be laughed at for not having enough, if you don't know what that does to the child who's standing there holding a bag with a stuffed rabbit in it, watching a man who has never counted coins dismiss the person who counts them as quietly as that man was dismissed, then I want you to understand it, and I'm going to try to describe it as accurately as I can, because it's important and it's usually left out of the stories about people who build things. It doesn't feel like rage, not at 7. It feels like a kind of solidifying, a thing clicking into position in your chest that wasn't there before. A knowledge, not yet named, that this is wrong and the wrongness is specific and someday you're going to know what to do about it. It's a long and slow kind of anger, the kind that doesn't burn out because it doesn't burn. It accumulates, and it organizes, and 20 years later it's a development plan. Subscribe and stay with me, because the rest of this story takes a long time to happen and it's worth the waiting. And if you grew up in a house where the math was always tight and the person doing it never complained in front of you, this one is for you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read them, and I want to know. Now let me jump forward, because the middle part is a life, and I can't give you a whole life in a video, so I'll give you the parts that connect to December of 1998. My father's pride about money came in at the useful angle, not the destructive kind, of pride that refuses help and makes everything harder. The constructive kind, the kind that says a problem with a number on it is a problem you solve, and you solve it with the resources you have, and the resources you have are sufficient if you use them correctly. He taught me to do a budget before I understood what a budget was. He taught me that a dollar saved is more powerful than a dollar spent because a dollar saved can become $2 and $2 can become 4 and 4 can become a building fund. He made rice on Sundays with as much attention to craft as any chef who's ever been reviewed, because if the rice was excellent, then every meal was excellent, and excellent meals are a form of dignity that costs almost nothing. I went to the state university on a scholarship I'd worked for since the 9th grade. I studied urban planning because I'd grown up in a neighborhood that planning had done wrong, the highway that cut through it in 1967. The mall that was built in 1984 to serve it and decided by 1990 that its real customers were the suburbs and slowly turned its back on the community it sat in, leaving behind an anchor that was more like a nautical anchor, a dead weight, pulling everything around it down. I studied it because I wanted to understand how it went wrong, and because I believed, and I have believed this since I was 10 years old making car repair math with my father, that anything that went wrong because of a human decision can be made right by a different human decision. The master's degree took 4 years because I worked through it. Not worked through in the casual sense. I had a full-time job during the days and went to class at night and slept in the gaps, which at 23 is possible in a way it will not be at 40. I had student loans and I had a budget notebook that looked remarkably like my father's, not because he gave me his but because I made my own in the same image, same format, same small careful handwriting, same columns. After school I worked for a city planning department, then for a non-profit housing developer, then for a private firm that did mixed-use development, but only in the already successful neighborhoods, which was fine work and not the work, and I did it for long enough to learn everything I could from it, and then I left. Starting Carver Development Group in 2009 is the kind of decision that looks either very smart or very stupid, depending on when you evaluate it. I'll tell you what I told my father when I told him I was doing it, which is that when the market collapses, some things become affordable that weren't before, and the people who can move when others can't are the people who end up with the things that matter. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Where'd you hear that?" I told him I'd worked it out. He said, "No, your grandfather used to say that." He said it about the 1970s. I didn't know my grandfather. He died when I was 3. But apparently I'd arrived at the same logic independently, which either says something about the transmission of ideas through families, or something about what recessions make obvious to people who've never had the option of waiting them out. I bought distressed properties in communities that looked by the standard metrics, like bad investments, and I made them into real investments by changing the question. Not, what can I extract from this neighborhood? But, what does this neighborhood need, and what's the financial architecture that makes providing it into something sustainable? It's not charity and it's not altruism, though people sometimes call it that when they're being slightly condescending. It's a different kind of math. A longer kind. The kind that accounts for what a stable, healthy community does to surrounding property values and tax revenue and the cost of services over a decade. The kind that my father taught me at the kitchen table with the car repair columns, which is that the right answer isn't always the fast answer, and the fast answer isn't always the right one. And if you're patient enough and careful enough and willing to do the work, the right answer and the viable answer are usually the same answer, just measured differently. It took years. The first project lost money on paper for 18 months before the numbers turned. The second one was slower. The third one is where people started paying attention. And by the fourth and fifth, the model had been written up and cited, and now other firms are doing versions of it in other cities, which is the outcome I wanted, not because I wanted my name on the methodology, but because there are more neighborhoods than I can ever work in, and the methodology needed to get loose in the world without me. I bought distressed properties in communities that looked by the standard metrics like bad investments, and I made them into real investments by changing the question. Not, what can I extract from this neighborhood? But, what does this neighborhood need? And what's the financial architecture that makes providing it into something sustainable? It's not charity and it's not altruism, though people sometimes call it that when they're being slightly condescending. It's a different kind of math. A longer kind. The kind that accounts for what a stable, healthy community does to surrounding property values and tax revenue and the cost of services over a decade. The kind my father taught me at the kitchen table with the car repair columns. I was good at it because I believed it, and I believed it because I'd been raised in one of the communities that the standard metrics wrote off, and I understood from the inside that the problem was never the people. The problem was the math, and the math was someone else's choice, and a choice can be unmade. It took years. The first project lost money on paper for 18 months before the numbers turned. The second one was slower. The third one is where people started paying attention. And by the fourth and fifth, the model had been written up and other firms started doing versions of it in other cities, which is the outcome I wanted. There are more neighborhoods than I can ever work in. The methodology needed to get loose in the world without me. I had been tracking the Westfield Valley Mall for a long time. I drove past it in my late 20s and noted that it was declining, the way malls decline. The big anchor stores leave first, then the mid-range retailers. Then the small ones fill in with uses that have lower margins and shorter leases, and the parking lot gets emptier, and the building that was supposed to be the economic heart of a neighborhood becomes instead a monument to the decision not to invest. By my mid-30s, I had the professional standing to look at it seriously. The numbers told the story of a building that had been mismanaged for a decade, under-maintained for longer, and had lost its reason to exist as the thing it was built to be. The redevelopment plan took 2 years to build, and the most important part of those 2 years was not the financial modeling or the zoning analysis or the architectural design. It was the community meetings. I held 12 of them, in church basements and community centers and the back room of a restaurant on Clement Street that had been there since 1972, and that I'd been to once with my father when I was 9. I brought the questions. What do you need here? What's been missing? What would make this neighborhood different if it existed? I brought a recorder and a notebook, and I listened the way my father listens. The whole attention, the taking it seriously. The people in those rooms had been waiting a long time to be asked. They told me about the pharmacy that had closed and the 3-mile bus ride to the nearest one now. About the library branch that had been cut in the 2007 budget and never restored. About the clinic that operated out of a converted storefront 2 days a week because there was nowhere permanent to put it. About the apartments that families were being priced out of while the vacant mall sat on 2 acres of land doing nothing. It was, assembled, the clearest brief I've ever received for a development project, and the people who gave it to me had been watching that land for years waiting for someone to come ask. I bought the mall in 2019. The ribbon cutting was June of last year. My father was there. He was wearing the same dark trousers, which he still has, which still fit because my father is a meticulous person. He stood next to me during the ceremony, and when I spoke about the neighborhood, and the community, and the research, and the plan, and the people who'd made it happen, and I did not say anything about a mason jar or a manager who laughed in 1998, because the ceremony was not the place for it, and the manager, to be honest, is not the person the story is about. The story is about my father, and the stuffed rabbit, and the way a 7-year-old girl watched a man count coins on a counter, and learned something that took 20 years to become a building. After the ceremony, we walked through the commons, through the library and the clinic lobby and the courtyard, which on a June afternoon had children in it that I watched my father watch with a quality of attention I recognized from a lifetime of being its subject. He looked at the children the way he'd always looked at me, like what they were doing mattered, and he wanted to see all of it. We sat in the courtyard and I got us both coffee from the cafe. The cafe is run by a woman named Gloria, who used to run a coffee cart in the old mall parking lot, and who I found through the community research 2 years ago. Which is a fact I find specifically satisfying, and I told him. I told him about the jar on my desk. I told him what I'd thought about every time the project got hard, and I needed to remember why it mattered. I told him about counting coins in the courtyard of the mall we were now sitting in the rebuilt version of, and about the bus ride home, and about his hands on the counter, and about what he'd said on the escalator. I'd never told him any of it before. Not because I was saving it, because it had been running in me for 20 years as a private thing, a thing that was mine, and I wasn't sure until that June afternoon that it was time to give it back. My father listened to all of it, without saying anything. He is a very good listener, in the way a man who has spent a lifetime taking things seriously becomes a good listener, not performing attention, just paying it. When I finished, he looked at the courtyard for a long moment. I didn't know you were carrying that, he said. Since 1998, he nodded slowly. Then, I was worried about the coins, that whole morning. On the bus I was counting them in my head, making sure I'd counted right at home, making sure I had the tax right. I'd counted them 5 times, but I kept wanting to count them again. He smiled, small, private, the smile he has when something is funny to him in a way he's not going to explain. I had exactly enough. You always did, I said. Not always, he said, but enough times. And the times I didn't, I figured out how to find more. He looked at me. You learned that part. I learned it from watching you. He looked back at the courtyard, at Gloria's cafe, at the library doors, at the children on the benches. I didn't think about the building when I was counting those coins, he said. I was thinking about the rabbit, about getting it home before it was dark so we could put it under the tree early. He paused. Your mother had left us the tree skirt, the red one with the gold trim. I wanted the rabbit under that skirt before it got dark. He hadn't mentioned my mother in a while. I waited. She would have liked this, he said, about the commons. Not the way you say things, because they're supposed to be said, the way you say things because they're true and you've been carrying them, and this is the right moment to let them out. Yeah, I said. She would have. We sat there in the courtyard for a while, my father and I, in the building that used to be a mall and is now something else, drinking Gloria's coffee, watching children in the June afternoon light, and I felt the very specific feeling that comes when a thing you've been building for 20 years in the direction of something finally arrives at its destination. The jar is on my desk because it is the object that holds December of 1998. It holds the escalator, and the hand, and the coins in rows, and the question my 7-year-old self asked, and the answer my father gave me that has been running through everything I've done since. It holds the specific weight of a man standing at a counter and refusing to be diminished by a laugh, counting out the correct amount, addressing the cashier and not the manager, finishing the transaction on his own terms. I could have framed it. I could have put it behind glass and made it art. I didn't. It holds pens. It's useful. My father would have wanted it to be useful. The pens I use to sign documents for projects in neighborhoods like the one I grew up in. I use them to sign documents that are, in the specific language of development, converting one use to another, converting the places the market wrote off into places where the people who were written off can live, be healthy, be educated, read books for free. The pen comes out of the jar every time. That's what I know. That's the whole thing. The manager who laughed is not in this story except in the periphery. And that's where he belongs. He's not the lesson. He's not even the catalyst. My father would have raised me to do what I do regardless, because the values came from him, not from the insult. The insult just clarified the target. It showed me, at 7 years old, what I was going to spend my life building against. A world where counting coins is a thing to be laughed at. A world where the man in church clothes carrying a mason jar is someone the room looks at and decides to make smaller. I have spent 20 years changing the rooms. The rooms are different now, in ways I can point to and document, and in ways I can't, and I intend to keep changing them. Here's what I know, and it's the only thing I'm certain of after 20 years of this work. The cruelties aren't always dramatic. The ones that shape lives most aren't the big theatrical ones. They're a manager's laugh. They're coins being a source of embarrassment in a room full of Christmas music. They're a community being turned away from the building that was supposed to serve it, 1 year at a time, by decisions that felt like they were just business. They're small, and they accumulate, and what accumulates in the child who watches is not only hurt, it's a map. A map of exactly where the problem is, and who has it, and what it feels like from the inside, and what the inside looks like to the people who live in it. And some of the children who grow up carrying those maps become the people who go back to the problem with the tools to change it. I went back to the problem. I brought what I had, which was 20 years of education and practice and the specific understanding that the wrong side of the math is where most of the real people live, and the math can be changed, and changing it is work and not charity. That distinction matters. It's the distinction that makes it sustainable. It's the distinction that makes it a business instead of an episode. And I laid it on the counter the way my father laid the coins, organized and exact, and I said, this is the correct amount. This is what it takes. Here it is. My father taught me that the coins are sufficient. The amount is correct. You don't apologize for the form it comes in. You count it out and you address the cashier, not the manager, and you finish the transaction on your terms. That is the whole curriculum. I've been teaching it back to the world in concrete and glass and library books and clinic appointments for 20 years, and I intend to keep going. The manager is retired, I assume, or doing something else. The mall he managed is a public library and a clinic and 72 units of housing now, and the people who live in those units include some of the same families who were in that neighborhood in 1998. I did not do any of this for him. I did it for Gloria, who used to sell coffee in a parking lot and now has a cafe. I did it for a 7-year-old girl who watched her father count coins and learned 2 things at once. What the world does to people who count coins, and what a person looks like who refuses to let that determine the outcome. So this is for the parents who count coins. For the ones who carry mason jars across cities in their good clothes and lay out coins in raws and say, to the cashier, not the manager, this is the correct amount. You are being watched. What you're showing your children is not poverty. You're showing them that math is solvable, and dignity is not optional, and the problem is never the people. You're giving them the map. And some of them will use that map for the rest of their lives, and will build things on the site of the humiliation that you couldn't have imagined standing at a bus stop in December. Tell me in the comments about the parent who counted coins for you. Or if you're the one counting now. I'd like to hear. My father had exactly enough. He always did. And and I intend to spend my whole working life making sure the next child in that store doesn't have to watch anyone laugh. The next child is already in that store right now, somewhere. They are watching. I want them to see what I saw, which is a person who counts out the correct amount and addresses the cashier and does not leave until the transaction is complete and the rabbit is in the bag.